All right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Fatima and your colleagues from Atlantic Council. Today we are gathered here for a session to listen to Fatima brief us about her report on evolving landscapes, media landscapes in India and Pakistan. And we hope to have a good discussion. Today I have with me my colleagues from CSSPR. They are the research faculty and they're also teaching faculty at the School of Integrated Social Sciences. So we can begin with a very brief round of introductions. There is no particular manner, but it's really now difficult because everybody is on my screen. So I'll begin with myself. I'm Rabia Akhtar. I'm Director, Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. I'm also head of the Department for School of Integrated Social Sciences at University of Lahore. I would now let's have introductions from Atlantic Council Group, and then we'll move to my colleagues. So over to you, Fatma.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Fatima Salman. I'm the Associate Director for the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. I'm also the author of this report that we'll be discussing today. So I'm really excited to meet you all and have this conversation. I'll hand it over to Irfan.
Thank you, Fatima, and thank you, Rabia, so much for hosting Fatima this evening in Pakistan to discuss this. My name is Irfan Nuruddin. I'm the director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council and professor in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University here in Washington, D.C. And I grew up in Bombay, India. In case you're wondering, that's the background behind my head as well. So, Fatima has written, I think, a very fascinating report that was based on about 2 years worth of research done by our colleagues at the Atlantic Council and finished by Fatima. We really welcome feedback, and in particular, we'd love to get your thoughts on sort of where optimism could be found, what could be actionable that could help improve the situation that she'll be describing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irfan. Good to have you here with us. What about your other colleagues? Since I don't know their names, can you, Fatma, call them out for introduction?
Of course. Harris, why don't you go ahead and then just call on some of our interns to introduce them.
No. Sure. Haris Samad. I'm a project assistant with the South Asia Center, and I work very closely with Fatima on our Afghanistan work, and I also dabble a little bit in our work on Pakistan as well. So I see a couple of our interns on here. Azim, I will pass it over to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Azim. I'm a fall intern at the South Asia Center, and I'm a graduate of Columbia University in South Asian Studies, and now I'm working with the Atlantic Council.
All right.
Great. Shashank, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Shashank, another intern at the South Asia Center. I graduated from Tufts University 3 years ago, studied economics and international relations, and supporting Fatima, Irfan, and Harris right now.
That's great.
And just one more, Kaveri.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Kaveri. I recently graduated from a small liberal arts college, Beloit, in Wisconsin, where I majored in international relations and psychology. And I'm from New Delhi, India, and I'm excited for the talk.
All right. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to host you guys here for the first time, and I'm looking forward to future engagements as well. I will now call Dr. Tahmina to please introduce herself.
Hello everyone, I am Dr. Tahmina Aslam. I am Assistant Professor at School of Integrated Social Sciences and Research Fellow at Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. Nice meeting you all here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tahmina. I'm just going to go by the list that's displayed. So it's not junior, senior, it's all of us together. So Amber, over to you now.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah, your voice is pretty dim, dull. Thoda sa uncha bolo. Okay.
Is it better?
Little bit.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Amber Safar. I'm working in UOL as a lecturer in School of Integrated Social Sciences. So I'm excited for the talk.
All right, thank you. Dr. Kishwar?
Hi everyone, my name is Kishwar Munir. I'm assistant professor at School of Integrated Social Sciences. Thank you.
Thank you. Saptan?
Hello everyone. It is really a good, a meeting that is going to be really fruitful for all of us. This is Fatima, and I recently joined University of Lahore and Dr. Rabia's team as a lecturer. And I recently graduated from University of the Punjab, and my major were international relations and security studies. And I'm really looking forward to everything that is going to be there, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Saptan. Dr. Aisha?
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Aisha Jalil, Assistant Professor of School of Integrated Social Sciences and CSSPR, and my areas of research interest are health services and social inequality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ali?
Hi, I'm Alizia Jaffrey. I'm the research associate at CSSPR here. I also teach in the department. I am also the associate editor of Pakistan Politics. I just finished my fellowship at the Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. I focus on nuclear deterrence strategy and geopolitical issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Fazan?
Hello, my name is Fazan Rashid. I recently just joined CSSPR last week, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Farwa?
Hi everyone, I'm Farwa. I'm a lecturer at School of Integrated Social Sciences and also a research associate at CSSPR. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Haris?
I went already, but happy to.
No. There's Haris Waleed here, who's
Oh, I'm sorry.
Semesters.
Hello everyone, I am Haris Waleed. I am a student of final semester at Social Sciences Department, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Haris. Hassan?
Hello everyone, my name is Hassan Sadiquddin Zavik. I'm a lecturer at School of Integrated Social Sciences. As I have been trained in political science and have a master's in public policy and communist geography from China, and I teach media and politics among other things, philosophy and development studies including. And I welcome my guests from the Atlantic Council. So have a great meeting.
Thank you. Hassan, your voice is a bit muffled, so if you can do something about it during the Q&A, that would be great. Ikra?
Hello, everyone. My
voice
name
is cutting off.
I'm working as a lecturer in School of Integrated Social Science. So it's been 4 years I'm here. So I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, Ikra. Mariam?
Thank you.
Mariam Akbar, can you hear me?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mariam Waheed and I'm from School of Integrated Social Sciences and I'm in my final year.
All right, thank you. Ajmal? Ajmal, can you unmute and introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everybody. My name is Ashmal, and I'm also a lecturer at the School of Integrated Social Sciences and Research Associate at the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. I'm excited for today's meeting. I welcome colleagues from America, and I'm looking forward to listen to this discussion.
Thank you, Ajmal. Shari?
Good morning to my friends at the Atlantic Council and good evening to my colleagues at University of Lahore. My name is Mohammed Shari Qazi. I'm a lecturer at the School of Integrated Social Sciences and a research associate at CSSPR. My areas of interest include nuclear politics, particularly in dimension to nuclear warfare and escalation doctrines. And it will be a pleasure listening to this particular read that we're about to indulge in. Thank you so much for this particular
Thank you
opportunity.
so much.
Hello, this is Tahavid. I'm working as an assistant editor and as a research associate at CSSPR and School of Integrated Social Sciences. And I'm looking forward in listening to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tahavid. Shafir?
Hi, I'm Shafir Suhail. I'm a graduate of Stockholm University and I'm working as a lecturer at School of Integrated Social Sciences. Thank you.
Thank you. Shanila? Shanila, you can unmute yourself and introduce, please. I think Shanila has an issue. Dr. Shahzad?
Hi everyone, I'm Shahzad Akhtar. I got my PhD from the University of Auckland, New Zealand. I'm working as assistant professor at the School of Integrated Social Sciences and research fellow at CSSPR. I'm looking forward towards today's discussion.
Thank you. Waqas Iqbal?
Hello, this is Vikas Iqbal. I am working at Center of Security Strategy and Policy Research as Research Fellow. I'm also teaching comparative politics, also Associate Editor of Pakistan Politico. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Zainab?
Hello everyone, my name is Zainab Dar and I did MPhil in Political Science from Kennedy College, Lahore in 2018. I have been working as lecturer in School of Integrated Social Sciences since then. My area of research are political communication, politics and gender and political culture, and I'm looking forward to listening and learning from this discussion on a very pertinent topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And lastly, I see Fatima Saif. So Fatima, please introduce yourself.
Hello, Assalamualaikum. My name is Fatma. I'm student of School of Integrated Social Sciences. I'm in my 8th semester, and my area of interest is terrorism and counter extremism.
Thank you so much. Wow, so we finally managed to cover all the introductions. So with this, Fatima, I would like to give the floor to you. And the way we should do is my suggestion that you brief us about the report, your findings, whichever way you want to share with us. We all have read the report, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions for you. So looking forward to this. So I would urge everybody else to mute themselves, please, so that there's no background sound and noise. So over to you, Fatma.
Great. Well, assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today, Rabia, to have this really important discussion and conversation. And I think just before I begin, I also wanted to just plug, I'm going to just send a link into the chat. We are also having a conversation tomorrow with prominent journalists on this topic at UC Berkeley. It's a virtual affair, as everything is these days. And we're going to be speaking with Kamal Siddiqui from IBA, and then also Nidhi Razdan from India, and so 2 different journalist perspectives from both India and Pakistan. So please also join us tomorrow, and it's in the evening your time. But just to begin, I wanted to just give you all a kind of synopsis. Thank you all for reading and being engaged with the report. It's the methodology behind this report is a culmination of a 2-year effort where we've done field interviews with local journalists that are covering foreign policy beats in both India and Pakistan. So we've gone to New Delhi, Mumbai, Islamabad, Karachi, and Lahore to do these interviews, and spoke about and the report is really being funded, was funded for cross-border exchanges and dialogue between journalists from both sides of the border. We also held Pakistan and India under the Chatham House rule to really discuss the role of media in diplomacy, which is the general topic where this report falls under. And so in this report, we include the analysis from these interviews and these discussions and their implications. And then we also propose a path forward for news media in the region. And so these journalist contributions were central to deepening the center's understanding of the subject matter and narrowing the focus of this report. So the three major takeaways, as you saw and highlighted in the report, is one is the broad trend, the changes over time with the advent of technologies. First, we kind of highlight the advent of television and broadcast news media, and today what we're seeing as the internet and social media platforms, and how new regulatory challenges have emerged and emerged in early 2000s and late 90s in both India and Pakistan to really meet the needs of these new technologies in order to get ahead on the information campaign. And you saw the highlights. A historical overview is necessary, especially when it comes to the media liberalization in both countries. But the Kargil War in 1999 was pivotal for television news media liberalization, and especially the Musharraf era, which we can talk more about during Q&A, was also very pivotal and instrumental in the landscape that we see today in the industry. And we still have remnants of this era today. And so happy to discuss that a little bit more, but it's very, very fascinating to also highlight the influences of what we see today as hindrances to freedom of press. The second major takeaway is the manipulation then that came of news media business models. In both countries, there have been real increases in monopolistic tendencies and aggressive market practices aimed at increasing market share and killing competition in the press sector. And now we're seeing this even more with the increased use of social media platforms as they are competing with local journalists and fact-based reporting. So I think the main takeaway from that section and from that conversation is really, without the diversification in these business models, the news media's role as a government watchdog is jeopardized and is in constant threat of being a mouthpiece for the profit-driven industry, which at the end of the day is in the pockets of politicians and the pockets of military leaders and other ruling parties in that on the national platform, but also on the local platforms. The third main takeaway from this report is just the issues that are exacerbated by the role of social media and just the regulations and authoritarian type of kind of tendencies on journalists and the freedom of press. Today, India's media landscape mimics that of the 1975 state of emergency during Indira Gandhi, a period where there was massive media censorship and suspended civil liberties. And then, we see this in both India and Pakistan. Since we're pre-independence, journalists also toggled between nationalist versus loyalist lines of reporting, and we're seeing remnants of that today on the national and local levels in both Pakistan and in India. And this was mentioned by reporters during our interviews. And so today in Pakistan, so that was India now, and today in Pakistan, it still remains one of the most dangerous places for journalists. Media workers, as you all might know, have been kidnapped, tortured, beaten to death for delving into the nation's military and spy apparatus agencies. And so in many ways, what the report does is it highlights the Musharraf era, which enjoyed a brief period of relative freedom of press, but then it was chipped away bit by bit, and the ramifications of the era of liberalization are still felt today in Pakistan, right? Journalists continue to struggle with the pressures, both internal and external, to use their power in support of someone else's agenda, whether that of the judiciary, the opposition, the state, or the military. So, not to speak too much, I'd love to get to your questions and the conversation, but really, in closing, the report falls short of any prescriptive suggestions. It offers clues to how the industry in both India and Pakistan can respond and move forward, right? Some of the outstanding questions that still remain are, what, if any, role does the public have in enforcing better standards for this industry? And now, is this a matter of training journalists to meet these ever-changing pressures and an ever-changing field? And then finally, what is the role of the social media companies like Facebook, in whose platform is used in direct competition, as mentioned earlier, with local and fact-based reporting? Is there an area for these platforms to collaborate instead of compete with local journalists, and help train local journalists in digital, in kind of the digital space and in kind of the future of their industry? So that's kind of the general takeaways, and then also some of the final kind of closing remarks and kind of the questions that we hope to pose with this report. So hopefully we can open it up to a conversation.
All right, thank you so much. My opening remarks, I'll just make some opening remarks, and then I would want anybody who wants to ask a question or comment, please raise your hand and I will get to you and give you the floor. So Fatma, excellent report, and I'm sure, your 2 years of field work, has, I don't know how your on-ground experiences were, dealing with journalists and all, but it seems really interesting, and I'm sure a lot of hard work, went into writing this report then. So congratulations on it being published and out for discussion. So my so I have some broader takes about media and as to how it works. Generally, not only in our region, but media in general. And then I have a couple of questions for you, but I'll just pose one question at the end and give the floor to my colleagues to engage you. So media, I believe anywhere, it serves the dominant elite. And there is just, to me, it's a myth to say that any media is independent. So I'm sure those interested in this subject have read Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, or they know of the CNN effect as to what it is. It is taught everywhere. It's part of media studies. So which country in this world today has an independent media with no leaks or no lines fed to them? So perhaps none today. My brief thoughts on it are, a couple of points. Number one, there are billionaires who own presses around the world, and the same is true for Pakistan as well. There is no true editorial independence. It does not exist. If it exists, then please do, point it out to me. Those who own these presses, they interfere with what is published in their publications. They interfere with which editors are going to be in place and which journalists are to be promoted or fired or kept or, or kept away from the papers. So that's one thing. The second thing is corporate advertising revenue. I don't know. I would like to know that when you were researching and talking to these journalists, did you also talk to media houses who provide corporate revenue for these, publishing outlets or media in general? Because the advertiser, you cannot literally offend. And that's true for every media house around the globe. So media is heavily reliant on corporate advertising, and it also is used to compromise influences or what is written or what's not written. So that's another point. I would like to know whether I did not find much of that in the report, so probably that was not the focus, but I like to know that. Then another thing is about the political use of neutral sources. There have been a lot of academic studies out there that prove that systemic bias exists and as to how media covers events. Iraq War 2003 is a great example of it. The choice of sources that were used to, plug in the stories, they did not only influence whether countries were to join a coalition with the US, but it also helped regulate nationalism and as to whether a country was to go to war or not. So that's another thing. And my last point is about intelligence services. sort of manipulating press. And that also happens all around the world. There are attempts to recruit journalists. There are attempts to pose as journalists and write, in pseudonyms, and others planting for propaganda and all. So my broader question to you is that the collusion between the press and the government in promoting national narratives exists all across. So it happens everywhere around the world and no true independence exists. So why is that a negative thing? Why should we look at government using press to promote national narratives as a negative thing? And how do you draw the line between being independent and not being fed a line when you live in a society where, not only a society, when you look around you, around the globe, that around the world, it is happening. This is the way to go about it. So probably just your thoughts on that. One particular question I would like to pose is about where you mentioned about Pulwama, and as to how it was covered between, in India and Pakistan. One thing probably which I found missing was the timing Pulwama happened and its relation with the general elections that were happening. So your juxtaposition seems a bit misplaced, because that element I did not find there. There is quite a contrast in as to how the Indian media played the hysteria, the war hysteria, and the Pakistan card, because the general elections were approaching. And the kind of media coverage Pulwama got in Pakistan, there is just no comparison between the two. The civility with which probably Pakistani media handles Pulwama and its aftermath was completely missing in the Indian media. So I failed to find that comparison. So I will stop here. You can answer these questions now while I'll let others collect their thoughts and raise their hands, and then we'll move on. So over to you.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you. Excellent points. And I think you're right. I think that that was missing in the report as far as the Indian elections go. I think that the point of that also was to compare not only just the reporting of the incident across the border, because I do think that, there was obviously a difference, obviously given the different the national election versus no national election in Pakistan. But I also think that, the toggling between the lines that media, the journalists have to feel like they have to promote. I think for Pulwama, it was interesting to see where, the journalists had to, it wasn't necessarily very difficult for journalists in Pakistan to cover Pulwama, and that this is what they said with field interviews, and that, their coverage of Kashmir is, an Indian administered Kashmir, is pretty easy for them, right? Because you're calling out human rights violations. These are all things that international news media have also covered. The difficult part comes when you have to, for example, the Kartarpur corridor, also both sides covering very similar lines, but promoting each other's governments, right? And that, look at what, our government was able to do, open the border for these, Sikh pilgrims coming through. So I think that's kind of what we wanted to show, is the juxtaposition and the different pressures that journalists feel. And you're correct in that, it would have been probably stronger to highlight the pressures that journalists in India felt with the Indian elections coming through, and promoting a more jingoistic kind of line when it came to their reporting of the Pulwama incident. But with regards to your other so with the conversations with media houses, we didn't actually have conversations. And also, just for your information, this was our field interviews were also interrupted with COVID-19. So we were supposed to make one more trip in both India and Pakistan to continue these field interviews, which was interrupted, and it became very difficult to do these interviews online. And so that's kind of, we were hoping to do a little bit more, dive a little deeper into the media and the private kind of the business models of these media houses, but unfortunately we were unable to. But I think you make excellent points that this is not unique to India and Pakistan when it comes to the industry. I think what is unique is the problem of editorializing and labeling across the border. I think that's kind of what, and you've mentioned the Iraq war, which I think is also very valid, but I think it's important to kind of understand how the information campaign is generated in both India and Pakistan, right? That these are otherwise not very unified countries, right? When it comes to language, when it comes to ethnic backgrounds, especially in the 90s, where Pakistan was also very much struggling to unify based on one language, one ethnicity, and same with India. And they used news media to really unify people against an enemy, right? And I think that's what we're still seeing today, especially in Pakistan, where you do have, that's the big unifying factor with both countries. And I think that's what makes it unique, in that it's not something that's new, and it's not something that we're seeing just with the advent of internet, for example. The polarization was actually there from the beginning, right? Since partition. And so I think that's what's really fascinating when you're studying specifically the news media landscapes in both India and Pakistan. So those are just some of the comments I wanted to make, but I'd love to hear what other folks thought.
That's great. That's great. That gives me a clarity. And I hope when you do 2.0 on this, you will definitely, delve more on these. So I see Ali Zia Jafri with his hand. So Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Mariam, for Fatma, for writing this excellent report. And I must say that you navigated the geopolitical tiff between India and Pakistan very well in the reports. I don't have a question, but I have a couple of comments, because this issue, despite not being one of my research interests, is very close to my heart, because I am a Twitter buff and I contend with in Pakistan. Look, in Pakistan, we are told two things. In order to avert a heart attack, you need to stop doing two things: watching Pakistan cricket team play, and the other is watching primetime Pakistani television shows. And this is exactly true, because both drive us nuts to a point that we have a heart attack. I just need to draw your attention. Just about 45 minutes ago, Pakistan's biggest news outlet, the News, attributed a wrong statement to the ambassador nominated from the US side to Pakistan. I pointed that out. You wrote that troll armies are, stifling, ethical journalism in Pakistan. I think, let me be very frank, journalism and ethics are two opposite things in Pakistan. I say this with a great deal of confidence. Recently, right from the Prime Minister till our NSA, all officials of Pakistan were pummeled on social media, on print media. They were called as CIA agents, they were called as Mossad agents, and nobody did anything to them. So I think a lot has happened. A lot of crap comes out from the Pakistani media, and the only thing that we demand, the public demands of those media outlets, is fact checking. Fact checking is a very important phenomenon that has to be taken into account. The moment for instance, the moment I tell any senior anchor to please read the report before tweeting, he launches a tirade against me and says that you're an ISI agent, you're paid from the establishment. And this is happening at the highest level. Believe you me, that the kinds of stuff that the Pakistani media says right on primetime television shows is and are unprecedented, to say the least. Another important point that I would like to highlight is that our media are held hostage by the billionaire phenomena that Dr. Rabia talked about. We have media houses who have personal grudges with rulers. We have two extremes. So the pro-government media houses, they go on a rampage to destroy the opposition despite the fact that their facts are wrong. And on the other hand, we have the anti-government and the anti-state media that goes in another direction and tramples upon all facts and figures. So what we demand, you said, how can the public play a part in improving the landscape of the media? I think the public can use social media to good effect. And if you resort to reading, if you resort to writing, you can effectively counter. There is no such thing as a fully free media. So media freedom with a tinge of accountability and responsibility is what we all look for. We want quality news, we want unhindered news, but we don't want news that is wrong. And wrong news in such an environment of fragility and instability can be very dangerous in more ways than one. Thank you very much. I think we can have another.
Thank you, Ali. So Fatma, you can reply to this and then move to the next question. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that, Ali. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and trying to address what the public's role in that is. And I think that goes back to also the private sector. There's a role in social media platforms, not only to train journalists, but also to do, media literacy campaigns, right? Or digital kind of media literacy campaigns and teaching, because citizenship journalism is something that started in Pakistan, in the Musharraf time, right? With the crackdowns and probably even before, but it was much more difficult. But during Musharraf era, it's so unique because that was also the kind of the launch pad for internet, right, in the world. And so you have citizenship journalism kind of coming out, and now today you see it all over. It's rampant, right? And so what are the social media platforms' role in also kind of educating the local kind of the local population and best ways to also report on facts, right? And also to promote facts instead of this disinformation and misinformation campaigns that go out. So it's really trying to also recognize, and that's again the public's role, but there's a lot of responsibility on the private sector, especially with social media companies, in my opinion.
That's great. We'll move to Ajmal.
Thank you, Dr. Rabia. Thank you, Ms. Fatma Salman, for sharing your findings, and congratulations for your report. You have brought the question of business models of media industry under discussion, and you have also proposed some changes. My question would be, have you come across anything like democratic dictates or a framework for media industry business model? And have you seen the compliance on comparative basis between India and Pakistan? First thing, does anything like that exist in the literature? And secondly, have you looked into it and compared the compliance of those guidelines or democratic dictates of the business model in the media industry? So I would like to listen to comments, because when you go to measure governance or good governance or democracy, so then this becomes very important. And have you come across anything like that I would listen your comments on this, please?
Thank you, Ajmal. Over to you, Fatma.
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, this goes back to, I think, 2007, where you had, and this is a case specific to Pakistan, you had the news media really making huge efforts to go against the government, right? And you gave news media were giving platforms to anti-government speech and anti-government leaders, right? Calling for the downfall of the Musharraf government, right? These are huge risks, and you don't see that a lot in today's journalism. In India, Pakistan, I mean, you don't see that worldwide, right? And so the reason I bring that example up is because, and I mentioned this at the outset of in the opening remarks, at the beginning of the liberalization period, I think for Pakistan specifically, there were bits of freedom of press. I think that we'll probably, it's going to be a long time until we see that again. And that was because there was a really good balance of regulations that the Musharraf government set forth to liberalize the media. And this is not just news media. This was entertainment. This was, radio. This was, this was broadcast all broadcast media in general, right? Not just focusing on news. But as you know, they saw, they as in the government, military, saw that, you know, press freedom was actually being used against their kind of narrative and this nation building that they wanted to set forth, the regulations got tighter, right? And in fact, even today we're seeing ambiguous language in regulation, and that's where it becomes tricky, because then you're allowing the private sector to really engage however they want in an ambiguous language, and on top of it, you're regulating speech, freedom of speech and press. So I say that, and Ajmal, this is not like something that was, you know, I've focused many hours of my research on, but, and hopefully maybe Rabia 2.0 can be that. But, you know, I would say that the beginning of Pakistan's media liberalization was probably the most ideal time for press freedom. And it's only been chipped away ever since then. In fact, we're still chipping away at some of the freedoms that were announced and promoted at the turn of the century. And so that's kind of my response to you. But Ajmal, I'm happy to discuss more. You know, would love to kind of hear other people's thoughts on that.
Thank you, Fatma. Over to you, Hassan.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. Fatima, my question was, I had two questions from you. One was about media liberalization. I think you already answered that. So to add to this comment that you just made about how that time was ideal for media liberalization and etc. So one of the first media channels, media houses that was introduced in the times of President Musharraf was called Geo News. And you can see a disparity that a channel that was introduced in military dictators' time or military dictators' era. So now it's one of the most hated channels by the establishment or the pro-national or the pro-government people. So how come that happened? One of the favorite channels became one of the most hated channels, because maybe it has to do with media liberalization, because now there are other media houses which the pro-government or pro-establishment people can align with. Secondly, my point was on Chomsky's propaganda model. We all know that both in India and Pakistan, it's a Thomas Hobbes kind of situation. Life of a journalist is a solitary, brutish, nasty, and short hair. So according to your report, how much Chomsky's model is relevant to the contemporary mediascapes of India and Pakistan? Okay, I know a few things about mediascape of Pakistan, but I would like you to comment on the Indian side of things, how the filters of the news that's introduced by Herman and Chomsky have been at play at, there. And another point, it was that today, the Airway news channel, it is being blamed to stereotype the members of Pashtun community. So have you done anything about that in your report? Thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you, Hassan. The life of the journalist is not that short. Some return happy and say that they were up in the north. So over to you, Fatma.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is pretty grim. I would have to agree with you on that. And honestly, I think that all journalists are brave. I think journalists specifically in our regions of study and your region of where you all live, there's an extra kind of, I don't know, element of bravery when it comes to that industry, in my opinion, especially in Pakistan. I think just to give a little bit more context of the Indian media landscape, you know, again, coming back to kind of the history of it. Indian news media or Indian government was able to use the 1999 Kargil war to their benefit, right? They came out of that war kind of winning in the information campaign, not only domestically, not only nationally with their own people, kind of galvanizing people who otherwise maybe were uninformed or uneducated on, one, that there was a war going on, because obviously India is vast, but then also two, why we were fighting in Kargil to begin with, as many of their sons and fathers were going off to this war. So they really won in the information campaign there domestically, but also internationally. You had international correspondents really feeding on the narrative that the Indian news media was pushing out at this time. Today, what you see is the manipulation of these Indian news media business models. And that's really specific to India. I mean, it's also very specific to Pakistan in many different ways. But the news houses, media houses in India are monopolized and really controlled by, huge conglomerates, industries, leaders that are again, like I mentioned, in the pockets of big politicians. And it's not just, I'm not just talking about like BJP led, really the vernacular news in India is also, I mean, there is some of a difference. I mean, I can say a bit of anecdotal as well, in that when I studied in Lucknow, reading Urdu newspapers versus reading the English news coming out of India, there were major differences coming out of those newspapers. One is very localized to discuss, local politics. But in Lucknow, you have a big Hindu majority, and you have a Hindu and a Muslim kind of dichotomy going on in UP, and specifically in Lucknow. And so how they covered, for example, specific policies to eradicate Urdu language from, specific, historical sites and monuments, and change the names to, Shabd Hindi, like pure Hindi, titles and names, that was reported very differently when it came to Urdu newspapers and Urdu people writing in Urdu versus in Hindi or in English, right? And so those are the different variations that you see in India. I do think that there is a bit more of a kind of Indian news media. I can call upon more kind of outfits that serve as a watchdog on government, and they do act as a very strong culture of a fourth institution to really challenge and check and balance the democratically elected government in India. But you also have many outfits that are very pro-government, and very similar to Pakistan in the sense that you can name off the top of your head the news media outfits that are pro-government, pro-military, and then quote unquote a little bit more independent or anti-government, right? And so it's very similar in India in that way, where you can call upon these news outfits who are pro-government, anti-government, and et cetera. And this is at a national level, but also at a very local level as well.
All right, thank you so much. Shari?
This is a very interesting notion that's coming up, and the debate we're having is again even more interesting. So I'd have 3 lines of inquiry directed to you, Ms. Fatima. The first is that your interaction has been directed towards journalists directly, so you're receiving information that is coming directly from them. Do you really see that both in India and Pakistan there is a tendency, not at an institutional level, but at an individual level, to serve as whistleblowers when it comes to not just protecting national interest of a state, but also protecting their own personal interests? Number 2, second question that I have is that we see that the development of media in India and Pakistan is courtesy of how we perceive the media outside Pakistan and India to be. Do you see there is a trend or a scheme or a trajectory where Pakistan's media outlets are somehow finding themselves more closer to one end of the Western media and Indians moving towards the other end? I'll give you an example. Most of the news programs or political discourses that occur in Pakistan follow lines of BBC Hard Talk. So they try to follow that pattern, they try to follow that particular dimension. Current modern day reporting in Pakistan tries to follow the CNN models. Do you think that these models were prevalent in your research when you were conducting it? And the third is, your research somehow bound together print media and electronic as well as digital sources. Do you see that maybe since there is a decline in print media in India and Pakistan, that is causing a little bit more polarization as compared to people referring to social media outlets and other outlets, because print media used to serve as the principal backbone of information rearing in these 2 countries. Now that it is on the decline, somehow it tries to resist the economic tendencies or financial benefits from big conglomerates. Sometimes it falls prey to them. Do you think that because the social media took over, electronic media took over, and print media sort of declined, this information maneuvering or biased information reporting became a larger perspective-based problem in these two countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Shari. Over to you, Fatima.
Yeah, wow, great questions. Really, really great questions. I'm taking note too, just for future reference. But the trend, just referring to the trend of Pakistani, oh, sorry, I think your first question was whistleblower tendencies in Pakistan and India. I mean, I honestly can't speak to that. And I know that I spoke to a lot of journalists. A lot of them were not on the record. And so I'm not sure what that means. I know that there is a fear. I mean, like I mentioned, and as you know, it is a very, I think it's a fear-run industry, right? You enter journalism in India and Pakistan. It kind of, we mentioned Hobbesian, it's kind of a Hobbesian kind of style of you enter it. It's a very brave profession. And I don't see whistleblower tendencies. I think that was a culture probably in the early 2000s, and I think the government has done such a good job of cracking down. As I mentioned, the statistics, 2016, Pakistan was the 4th most dangerous country for journalists to practice, you know, and so I think it's just becoming more and more dangerous to become a whistleblower, to kind of, as we've been mentioning, you know, to be truly independent, whatever that means in this industry. So I can't really speak to that, but I guess from my experience speaking to journalists, I don't see a whistleblower kind of culture or tendency within the journalism industry or field. With regards to just the trend or schemes of the Pakistani media outlets moving towards the West, and you mentioned BBC and CNN, I think that, I think it's very interesting, right? I spoke to international correspondents that were based in Islamabad. So they weren't Pakistani journalists. They were, you know, mainly, you know, European or American journalists based in Islamabad covering for BBC, Associated Press, even Voice of America here in the States. And it is really interesting. There's a very big difference in the journalism and the way they cover stories, even the same story. But I do think that, you know, they collaborate and they do talk to each other. So I think that's a positive. I think that, you know, Pakistani and Indian journalists are very careful in the associations that they make and following this culture of the BBC, kind of CNN way of or any kind of collaboration with these outfits, because the main kind of criticism that comes out of journalists in Pakistan, for example, is, you know, that's anti-government, that's anti-Pakistan, that's pro-India, or that's, you know, you're touting a, you know, Western, you know, point here. You know, this is a Western talking point, and you're shifting towards the West, and you're not loyal to your own country. And I think journalists are very aware, and they kind of walk that fine line, and it's an art, I think. And I have spoken to so many journalists in Pakistan specifically that really find that to be the most difficult, is walking that fine line. And again, like I said, when it comes to Indian administered Kashmir, it's not that difficult. In fact, that's the time where journalists feel like they're most aligned, I think, with international journalists and BBC, you name it, Voice of America. But something else that was mentioned, you know, the anti-government movements, the local movements that are happening, you know, the separatist movements, covering those things, it becomes a lot harder with movements in Balochistan, for example, other ethnic, you know, marginalized groups in Pakistan. Journalists then have to become a lot more quote unquote loyalist or jingoistic, and really try to have to walk that fine line. And sometimes they're complacent, right, in the way they report to meet that pro-government, you know, pro-national kind of line. And then finally, just the polarization point. I think you make a fascinating point of, like, from print media to kind of the more broadcast media, and then moving into now like internet and social media. I think we have become more polarized. This is worldwide. This is not just specific to India and Pakistan. The United States has also become more polarized with the usage of social media. But I do think that there's a combination of less regulation, and again, I mentioned ambiguous regulation on these platforms. And I think the more the advent of technology becomes within this sector, in this industry, the less the government knows how to control it, right? And that's kind of where you see kind of the polarization effect. But you also have the creation of alternate realities now, right? And that is a big ode, I guess, to social media, and politicians really doing and being I think the push for that is kind of what we're seeing in social media today. Is politicians creating these alternate realities. They're questioning fact-based reporting by questioning the facts, and I think that is where social media is playing a really detrimental role in this industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fatma. Over to Sitan.
Well, thank you very much, ma'am. And first of all, Fatma, congratulations on this brilliant report. I think it's a great addition to the literature, to the media and politics. Most of the things have been already clarified, but I would like to comment on the now security perspective, because, this report is also saying that, the security implications in the context of the media and politics landscape in Pakistan. Well, from 2018, I would like to add some interesting things here. From 2018 to the 2019, I worked in one of the most prestigious and perhaps the second largest private media network in Pakistan. It's called Dunia News Network. It is the second largest after Geo News. So I was covering general elections, and my responsibility was to cover the NA 257 region to NA 272 region, that is in Balochistan. So my responsibility was to cover Balochistan. Now, you have said in your report that, there are some elements like it really, goes to that question that which public institution controls the statecraft of the whole state. So that particular institute also has that tendency to control the other institutions for the perspective of the national interest. Now, I'm going to go into the real political domain, and I'm going to say something that is really important, not just to your report as well, but to the whole conversation. Now, the question is that what determines the geopolitics of South Asia? It's a very important question. The answer is in two different categorization. First is the regional, that has that element in it of the balance of power system in between Pakistan and India, because that determines the geopolitics of these smaller states that we have in our surrounding, from Afghanistan to Bangladesh and from Sri Lanka to Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives. Now, the other is that international perspective of the American great power politics and its Indo-Pacific strategy in this region. Now, there are several conflicts in between Pakistan and India. Now, information war, now through these media groups, is a significant and a potent element in hybrid warfare, the unconventional warfare. And now in Pakistan military believes, and I have worked with them for about 6 months on an ad hoc basis, there is a significant threat perception right now. I'm talking about the psychology of the Pakistani journalists right now. They think that Pakistan is in the midst of hybrid warfare. Since 1990s, India is trying to influence its strategy by encircling it and have designs in West Asia, specifically in India and Afghanistan. Now, in that context, it is really important for them to control the media as well. So don't you think that as long as we have that balance of power system, and there is so much debate in it that some realists say that balance of power is evident for peace in any region, but some say that no, it paved the way for armaments, and it paved the way for all the conflicts that we are facing right now. And it is an endless debate. But the central point is that don't you think as long as we have conflicts in between each other, it is really impossible for our journalists to have a common ground, because it is really important for the state to establish a common ground, so that at the individual level we can talk to each other. But when you work from the state apparatus, it is a completely different game. Now, I would like to say, I would like to give a news, and then I would like your thoughts on it, because now I have some reports from my video journals that Pakistan, after reopening the Kartarpur corridor during this pandemic, is about to launch a Kartarpur TV as well. Maybe it is going to be named after a Kartarpur TV, or maybe Punjab News Network. But it is according to the line of Imran Khan, who said in United Nations General Assembly's first speech that Mr. President, as long as any Muslim society is going against the interest of the minorities, it is going against the teachings of Islam. So in order to give that right to the Sikh community to have their own TV and to have their own say, I'm perfectly sure about that, that under Modi's government, Ajit Doval is going to consider it as a new tactic by the military, that it's a new strategy for the Khalistan movement, and it is an unconventional scenario that Pakistan is trying to establish. So in that sense, when the state politics is engaged in these sort of things, it becomes really difficult for people like us and the journalists to take sides, and for that they have to establish a pro-government stance as well. That's the only choice that they have, because when you have that sort of control. So I would like your comment on that security perspective, and specifically to that Kartarpur scenario and the other conflicts as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Satyan. Over to you, Fatma.
Yeah, it's a fascinating scenario, but also something that we've probably seen played out many, many times in the past. So it does not seem too far from reality, sadly. I think you make really excellent points. I mean, obviously, I'm not a journalist, so I can't speak to that perspective. But I think you're right. It's a conflict-run industry, right? As long as there's conflict, right? I mean, as long as there's conflict, we have to report on it, or journalists have to report on it, especially in India and Pakistan. So I agree with you on that. I think that it's become. This is kind of like an unpopular way of looking at it, but there are also areas where journalists, I mean, this is what a lot of the journalists said on the ground, right? They wish they weren't reporting on this all the time, right? They wish that they were reporting on other things that were happening locally or in other places in the world. For example, a more nuanced perspective on the CPEC, right? And Pakistan-China relations, or even climate change, something that you could actually report on I don't know if the word is objectively, but something that you can report on across the border that's going to be very similar. For example, we talk about this at the South Asia Center a lot, in ways that Karachi is facing climate change is very similar to the way Bombay is facing climate change, right? Port cities, once very close to each other if there wasn't a border put up, and the same with Lahore and New Delhi, right? And you have these cross-border kind of ways that you can actually have fact-based reporting, not necessarily conflict-driven, but also the point of the media is also to engage the public, right? And this is also to educate the public on these issues. But right now, all they're really educated on is the other side, right? Especially when you're becoming even more micro, when you go to Punjab provinces and either side, right? You're a lot more, tuned into what's happening on the other side, and very much more it's going to be, anti-Pakistan, anti-India, whichever side you're sitting on. So I think that there are other areas, and it also touches on security, right? Climate change is going to be an area that touches on everything, including security. And so why can't journalists kind of engage on those conversations, on those topics? And that's kind of what we're trying to propose as the 2.0 of these conversations, is where journalists can actually have common ground, and it's not touching and it's not pushing people to, I guess, pick a side, which we already know what side each one will have to pick, right? So I don't know if that addresses your question. And again, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to be addressing that, because I'm not a journalist in India or Pakistan. But maybe this is something you can pose tomorrow to the journalists that we do have on, because I think these are great questions. And these are just my thoughts.
All right, thank you, Fatma. Over to Amber and then Faizan.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible now.
Rabia, I think you're muted.
Sorry, Amber, can you please move closer to the mic?
Yes, I'm trying my best. I hope I'm audible now. Fatma, can you listen?
No, to me it's really faint. If you have any, headphones plugged in, please unplug and use the computer's direct audio probably.
Okay, so am I audible now? Or I'll just write the question.
No, it's a bit better. I think we can try. So please go ahead.
Okay, first of all, congratulations, Fatma, on writing such a good piece of writing. And My question is this: that as you have gone through this whole this research on the role of media in both the respective countries, and obviously you know now that the big names are involved. But my question is this: that what is your take on the general public demand? Don't you think that this trend of manipulating the news or generating the fake news is what people want to listen and see on the both sides, and this is what the journalists are doing? That's what I wanted to say, and kindly just comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you, Amber. Yeah, I think it's a catch-22 here, right? Because you have news media outlets saying that, or the private industry that's funding these these outfits, they're telling you that that's what the public wants, that's what the public demands, and then in turn, that's what the public gets used to, and that's what the public wants to see. And that's why that historical kind of lens in this report is very important, because it shows you kind of where it began from, right? The nation building. The media was so important for nation building. I mean, think about the industry, the film industries, for example, right? You have Lollywood, you have Bollywood, both using, movies and dramas. I mean, Pakistani dramas, right? It's a big promotion of, Pakistani life, right? Everyday life in Pakistan. And then you also have that perspective in Bollywood movies and all the different film industries that exist in Pakistan and India. So I think that it's a catch-22 there, that they're telling you that that's what the public demands, but we actually created that, or we as in, the government, the military, whoever, is funding these news media outlets, whether that's, or media outlets, news or entertainment, right? That's what that's what they've created, right? And then social media is another example of that, right? They're creating the person that wants that polarization. They want that, they want to see, one side or the other. They don't want nuance, and we're creating that for them. And then it's this perpetual, we're perpetuating that cycle of what we think that the public needs and demands. But I think in the past, what we've seen is that's not actually the case, right? And again, it goes back to that Lal Mosque kind of example that we give in that report. What a fascinating time in Pakistani history, where you had, news media putting, at the forefront anti-government, a leader, and then public is tuned in and listening, right? And that's when the government decides, we're going to shut this down. Like, this is not what we wanted to use the media for, right? And so I think that you have cases in both India and Pakistan where you see that that's actually not the case, that public maybe are not demanding this, but this is the demand that we are putting in our heads or fantasizing, and then it in fact becomes reality, right? Especially with social media. But I also think one other final example of the pushback from the public is also that, again, the citizen journalism that you're seeing coming out of especially Pakistan, right? It shows that, there's no trust now with reporting on the national level or even the local level, to the point where people are then saying, I'm going to report on this myself, right? And I'm going to show you and document for you what I'm seeing on the ground. So I think that we're seeing a lot of cases or like small clues and hints of like, that's actually not what the public needs or demands.
Thank you. Fatima, over to you, Fazan.
Thank you. Fatma, I wanted to ask the question that whenever the few instances when news media outlets on both sides of the border ever engage with each other, they kind of draw battle lines against each other. So I wanted to ask, does the journalist or the people who are engaging with each other in the news media outlets, do they need a reassessment and rationalization of conduct to reestablish a credibility before, as you recommended in your report, that our journalists and Indian journalists need to go international to add nuance and rehumanize the other side? So before that happens, you think
Fazan, you have accidentally muted yourself, I guess.
I am so sorry. I did not realize that. I just want to repeat again, no problem. I just wanted to say that before, like, news agencies, when they ever engage with each other, they kind of get into almost a fight and battle lines are drawn up. So you recommended in your report that Indian and Pakistani journalists need to go international to rehumanize and add nuance to both sides. So before that happens, you think we need to kind of reassess and reevaluate and rationalize the conduct of journalists to add stronger credibility in their own spheres before they go international. And I just wanted to add another anecdote. When you mentioned in the report Doordarshan, I kind of just suddenly realized that we used to have Dish TV, and Doordarshan even was very easily available in small towns in Pakistan. So I think that really impacted the narrative in our country. That. Thank you so much.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for that. I think you're right. And that was a lesson learned again from Indian kind of news media outlets, because that's what they were doing. And that's kind of what the report highlights also in India, the Indian equivalent to Doordarshan and all these other things. But just to kind of go on based on credibility, I think this goes back to Rabia's initial point, right? We need to reestablish credibility all over the world when it comes to this field and this industry, right? This is not just reestablishing between Indian and Pakistani journalists, because even, you know, Western journalists in both countries face these kind of like, oh, you're biased, you're touting a Western, talking point, Western perspective, you're pushing for more your Western agenda, right? It's whoever's agenda you're pushing. And I think that's where the problem that's what the problem has become. There's no credibility in any journalist, and so I think you're right. And I don't know like the exact solution for this. And I know that when I had conversations with journalists, their fingers all pointed to social media platforms, right? And that they need to take a stronger responsibility. It's not going to come from government. And in fact, we're seeing that in the United States too. It doesn't necessarily always come from government. The private sector, right, has a big responsibility. And yes, you're generating tons of money with ad revenue when it comes to elections and all these other things, but then kind of give back to the local population, give back to the local journalists that are struggling and you're competing against, actually. And that's what was mentioned throughout India and Pakistan, is that they're competing with kind of back to Umber's point of like what they think the public wants and needs is this instant gratification on social media of, whether it's true or not, just news that's coming out, right? I think somebody mentioned, false news coming out about just today on the U.S. Appointed ambassador to Pakistan. So it's just that I think that's what we're competing with when it comes to credibility in journalism. I think social media platforms actually have a big responsibility to play in bringing the cross-border exchanges to light and to fruition. But again, it kind of also highlighted in the report is the need for a more sustainable model for that, right? It becomes unsustainable when, for example, in 2008, you have the Mumbai bombings, and then you don't have, then everybody, is suspended from each country and then goes back and hides in their own corners. What are journalists then to do, right? Of course, they're going to then report on from their country, from that perspective, from that narrative, because they cannot actually cross the border. So there's a physical barrier there. And I think that, again, social media and internet actually allows us to transcend that. So it's really about being creative and innovative in that space.
Thank you. Fatima, before I move to Share and give him the floor again for a question, I have it's not a question. It's like when I read it, I really thought as to why would you say something like this, that Pakistan is inspired by authoritarian models of Saudi Arabia and China when it comes to controlling the media, because we just heard on our national televisions a convict, Nawaz Sharif, giving a huge sermon, and it was relayed on the TV and other platforms as well. This media is free to not only say things about government but also manufacture, as something Ali said, fake news. What made you make this huge conclusion? Because both China and Saudi Arabia are extreme models of control. And I, for one, as a Pakistani, having grown up and gone through various periods of our history, have seen media grow, is not as stifling as China and Saudi Arabia. So what made you make that conclusion?
So it wasn't, so again, these are not conclusions that I've necessarily drawn myself. These are coming from the journalists on the ground. And this is kind of what I'm hearing from them as how they feel stifled in their own kind of reporting. And I think a lot of that comes from, one, it's, they're feeling that pressure every day. They can point to the people that are actually pressurizing them. Of course, not on record, right? And so I think that, that in and of itself is very telling. And this is not like private industry, private, citizen of Pakistan, for example. This is like pointing to an institution in the government or the military, right? That's one. And then I think the second is kind of the inability to report on specific local issues. Again, it goes back to that. I think when it comes to reporting on the national level, I think there is a bit of more like maybe freedom, I guess you can say, but I don't think there is, and that this is what is coming out of the journalists, that they're not freely able to report, for example, on issues of Balochistan and the movements that are happening, anti-government movements that are a lot stronger that are happening in Pakistan. But again, and they fall into that trap of, is it pro-Western? Is this a pro-government, pro-military, or is it just fact-based reporting, instead of just kind of picking a side and falling into a bucket? And I think they're always going to have to fall into a bucket when it comes to India and Pakistan. So I think this is a finding and conclusion that the journalists have repeated to me, and that's why it's
all right. So just to be clear, it's the people that you've interviewed, the journalists you've interviewed, they are the ones pointing to these two models as comparative, looking at how they feel in Pakistan. All right, got it. So over to you, Shari, and then Ali. Shari, you can unmute yourself, please. Shari, can you unmute yourself, please?
Sure. Now, I was just about to ask a very, very simple question, but the conversation I just heard right now has somehow tied my hands behind my back to give a little bit of a commentary as well. One of the four reasons what we see in the journalism in India and Pakistan is that national news is important news. When you have domestic, local issues stemming on from smaller cities or smaller regions, somehow the tendency to project that to a national level or to project that as an important piece of news, we feel it's not really necessary for us to even consider. Even if there is a separatist movement or a secession struggle going on in any of the regions, we feel that it's not important for us to talk on because it's for us in our national sphere, not as severe as we think it is. Second idea is that since there is this personality cult in India and Pakistan, we have a subject political system in which we follow personalities, irrespective of what they preach, irrespective of what they suggest. That tendency somehow, because it's part of our culture, becomes part of our media ethical structure as well. So we have a few famous journalists, few names we can remember, few media houses, few names we can remember, who we feel are the ones who are making the real news per se. The third idea is that polarization does pave the way for misinformation and disinformation. This is where I'll lead my question to Fatima too, and that will be a very honest question. So a very childlike question. So my apologies if it disturbs the intellectual capacity of the discussion we are having since the last 1 hour. And the fourth idea is that the essence of seeing yourself in the bigger picture, the magnanimity of it all coming in from Bollywood, Lollywood, that magnanimity is something that captures our attention from the general public's perspective. And that's where news makes news. So anything that does not really make us look magnanimous, we're really not really interested in seeing that on national television at 9 o'clock. So my question is, whilst your research was being conducted and most of your research comes from primary sources, did you ever have that hunch from journalists from Pakistan and India? And I'm not going to use the word lying, it's unparliamentary, that the journalists you were interviewing were somehow concealing information, misrepresenting or malrepresenting while conversing with you? Did you have that hunch that the information they're disseminating to you might have been a little bit fabricated? Because we've established pretty securely that corporate interest as well as vested interest drives the way information is maneuvered. Did you ever, as a researcher, collecting first-hand research, had that hunch that somebody is trying to dodge the bullet you're throwing at them?
Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm trying to recall the different interviews. I mean, I think if I did, I would just restate the question and keep pushing until, and honestly, I would also just preface it with, if you don't feel comfortable answering this, you don't have to answer it. And so I think there were moments where people did not feel comfortable answering specific questions, but then it would just be going to the next journalist and asking, the very same question. So maybe the dodging part, I don't know if they misrepresented that I can't speak to. I never got the feeling that they did. First, because it's off the record, I don't know really what they had to lose, kind of giving me their honest feedback. I do think that they were very nervous that I wouldn't, share their names, share their media outfits and things like that. So I want to respect the sensitivity of the conversations. And so I don't believe that they were lying or misrepresenting, and that's up to, I guess, you guys to tell me from reading the report. But really there was dodging, of course, because some of these questions are tough, they're sensitive, and I recognize that. And so was very respectful of the journalist, but it wasn't a very simple question. That was that's probably the toughest question I've been asked tonight, because it's difficult, right? When you're doing field interviews, that's why the more the better, right? Just to get the different perspectives. So it's unfortunate that some of our field research was interrupted by COVID and the travel restrictions, but hopefully there will be more conversations with journalists now.
Thank you, Fatma. I might have missed it in the report, but can you talk about your sample a bit? How many on Pakistan side and how many on Indian side? How many journalists? What was your sample size?
So we did 10 and 10 in both in India and Pakistan. So the sample size was 10, or I guess 20. And then we also tried our very best to do do gender equality in our reporting, but there were very few. It was very difficult to get that balance necessarily equal, but so it was 10 and 10 through the different cities. I believe it was 3 in India and 3 in Pakistan. And so unfortunately we weren't able to get into the kind of nitty gritty. We wanted to get into the more local kind of news outfits, but we weren't able to, just given the timeline. But yeah, so hopefully, and then also, of course, Rabia, given the roundtable that we also had policy makers, people on the higher level, kind of decision makers in Pakistan and India, and then also civil society leaders from both countries engaged with this report and the findings too.
All right, great. Ali?
I think this has been a very riveting conversation. I just want to make a couple of points and a couple of clarifications. There was a point made by one of my colleagues who said that the military wants to control the media. First of all, I think this needs a bit of a clarification. I think firstly, the military is not as behemoth as people consider it to be, both inside Pakistan and outside Pakistan, especially in Washington, DC and around the Beltway. When we talk about control, we need to bring in nuance. We are not talking about controlling the media. We're talking about regulating the media that is more user friendly and more responsible, and it takes into account the fake news and the veracity of whatever it turns out. I can't help but mention something which I saw right in front of my own eyes in Washington, DC last year when I was there. So VOA Diva, a US TV channel. So I was at Capital One, 30,000 people jam-packed, waiting for the Prime Minister. And there were 3 Balochis from probably Africa or somewhere else. They were chanting Balochistan Zindabad. VOA Diva mentioned in a news ticker, huge protest against Imran Khan. 3 people, huge protest. While it ignored 30,000 people who were waiting for him and were, in euphoria of his visit. This shows a very dangerous trend in the US. One, it shows that it is interfering in the internal affairs of Pakistan, as evidenced by yesterday's hearing of Ambassador Todd. So this is something that we need to look at. Now, my quick query is, are you people in DC looking at the media landscape in Pakistan from your own prism? Because I can't look, we cannot have a media that panders to the to the people in Washington. We need to have a media that is in line with what we want, what we the people of Pakistan want. So why is this tendency for the people in Washington to look at the Pakistani media through their own prism without understanding which you've tried to make the people understand as to what is the local landscape in the subcontinent. So my query is this: why is the tendency still continuing on part of the DCIH to look at the Pakistani media and demand of Pakistan to have the media commensurate with what you people want or what the US establishment wants? Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Over to you, Fatima.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And just for clarification, of course, this is through a Western lens because I wrote it, and I grew up in America. I agree with you. I think that why should we kind of push our wants and needs from a media outlet, and as you mentioned, when we don't necessarily maybe always follow what we're trying to promote, everybody else follow all over the world. So I recognize that, and it's not something that I can personally speak to as somebody that works at the Atlantic Council, but that's something that we do try to push at our center, right? And that is something that we very much recognize, is that there is a Western heavy narrative anytime you come into discussing, I think especially Pakistan, right? And then India too. Now there's like a very different kind of way of speaking to about both countries, right? There's one that's like shared values and both democracies, and then with Pakistan it's the engagement through Afghanistan and kind of the war on terror and the help that they've given us. And so I think, of course, there's this there is a specific narrative being pushed on both countries that also has to do with the fact that there is not a lot of nuanced understanding of the region, right? Yes, India, Pakistan are enemies. That's basically, sometimes that is literally all that government folks know in DC. And Rabia, I don't know if you can attest to this, but so much of your research, so much of what you all are doing is hopefully helping in that conversation. Hopefully so much of what our center is doing is pushing that and helping give voice to Pakistanis. And that's exactly why, although it was written by a Western, institution, this report, it is journalists. We talk to local journalists, we talk to Indian and Pakistani journalists. And again, it's to provide that nuance that this is not, this report could have just been on Pakistan's news media landscape. And in fact, this could be a whole book or multiple books on it, right? There are. And then it could be the reverse on just India, but really the inspiration comes from how can these countries work together. I think that is the main interest, at least when it comes to our center and the work that we do with government and civil society, and then specifically with private sector. We want to see, for example, a flourishing, private sector in Pakistan, right? So how do we do that, right? We have to help give you all voices, the amazing work that you're doing on the ground, without it being drained out sometimes by a lot of the spoilers, right? Sometimes it is your government, sometimes it is your military, and then most of the time it is the way we're covering your government and military, right? And so we are hopefully a center that can actually provide that nuance. And yes, this report was written through a Western perspective and lens, but we're talking to you today about that, to recognize and acknowledge that, and then get your questions on this so that we can, again, have these conversations with journalists. But when we also present this report, for example, in briefings to different agencies in the government, we're able to say that, right? That we actually briefed university in Pakistan, and we're going to do something similar in India. Here are the questions, here are some of the concerns that they've called out from this report, and here's what they're pushing, right? They do agree that social media platforms need to have a larger role, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's kind of what the role we're hoping to play, especially with regards to this report. So I don't know if that answers your question or addresses your concerns, but of course, acknowledge and recognize that, this is through a Western lens.
No, absolutely. And we really respect Atlantic Council's work, and we see and compare your think tank with others in DC, and we see the kind of space and nuance that you're trying to create. So we really, that's why we are engaging, that's why we're working, because all of us are working towards the same objective, to bring more clarity on these issues and to project the kind of narratives which are not agenda based. And as somebody in academia and having a team part of a university, I think it is, we want to have space with a DC audience as well. so that they can understand us better. And I think Atlantic Council is doing, especially the South Asia Center that we engage with, is doing an excellent job in that. So I'll just give the last question to Ajmal. His hand is raised again, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you very much, Rabia. Ms. Fatma, I have a comment. Being a reader of the report with a social science background, this was a quest I found unaddressed, and your report would have been better had you covered the research methodology, a couple of paragraphs, sampling method, the discipline you have followed regarding your research methodology you used, and units of data collection. So it could have exhibited the validity of your report in more convincing way. I'm sure as you have done, because this report is based on a field work and primary data collection. So had you included these things, it would have exhibited the validity of your report, and many questions could have been addressed like this. And a short question, just I want to listen your opinion on it. What do you think that has been a lot of talk about the planted or agenda-based or some state actors influencing journalism or the practice of journalism and media houses and things like that. Whereas we can see in comparison the social media, which you call in your report, the digital media, including WhatsApp, Facebook, or Twitter, these things. And they're more inclusive, more democratic, more pluralist. Do you think it creates a balance to those influences because they are less controlled and less regulated, although they are, but not the like the media houses or other things? So have you given an eye on the comparison of these different three streams of media which you covered? Do you think it creates a balance between the flow of information coming from the business sector, private sector business, media industry, public sector, and the social media, digital media? How would you say it? Just would like to listen to your comment on it.
Thank you, Ajmal. Fatma, before you reply, so this was the research methodology comment was coming from an academic. So you can probably tell us as to what's the difference between policy brief report and an academic report. So over to you.
Yeah, and Robert, can you just repeat the question? Because I'm sorry, maybe I didn't catch it exactly.
So Ajmal was basically asking that since digital media is less regulated, probably it can serve as a balancer to the controlled media, which is print and electronic.
Got it. Thank you. So just on the methodology, I think you're correct. But again, as Rabia mentioned, this is not necessarily an academic report, or of course, I probably could get my PhD on this, to be honest, if I really wanted to, and then hopefully there I can really go into detail of the methodology behind this. Also wanted to, just for this group's reference, this was a report that I inherited, so it wasn't something that I came in. I haven't been at the Atlantic Council for 2 years. It's marked my 1 year and now moving forward. But so this was a report I inherited with field interviews that were already done before I came. And so some of that methodology was already set in place, and I kind of just continued the efforts given from the former team. So that's probably helpful as well, just for this group when it comes to the methodology and some of the reporting there. As far as less regulation and being more helpful, I think that there again needs to be a fine balance in that. I think that the governments, both India and Pakistani governments are really trying to figure out how best to regulate content on social media and the internet, and I think they're suffering and struggling miserably on doing that, because it's coming out with a bunch of protests, and we're also struggling in the United States, by the way, to regulate our own kind of internet infrastructures and platforms. And so I think this is like a worldwide problem of internet and content regulation. And I think that, the less regulation, although you're seeing more freedom of speech, you're also again seeing the reason why I think that these debates are happening is because content regulation is necessary in order to, I think, interfere with the mis and disinformation campaigns that have so easily kind of able to galvanize groups of people. I mean, I don't know if you guys are following some of the reporting coming out of Myanmar, for example, or the Philippines with regards to the attacks that are happening on the Muslim population, minority populations in these countries, all from, you know, social media campaigns, all from disinformation, misinformation campaigns that are not regulated. Right? And these are all through Facebook, all through WhatsApp messages that are being promoted, and even social media influencers that are then promoting these things, right? Because they don't know, they're just forwarding and copying and pasting and using their platform to promote these, So I think there's two sides of that coin. And I think that's exactly the danger is that you're kind of flipping the coin when you're saying something like less regulation, because we don't really know what the extent is of this space. By this space, I mean social media and more generally internet. And so I think we need to start diving into those conversations of what does good and, you know, proper regulation look like, as with regards to respecting freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the traditions of each country, right? And so that's kind of my opinion on that. But
excellent. Before we wrap up, would like to hear Irfan's views about, you know, the discussion today. So if he's still with us, would you like to say a few words, Irfan?
I think Irfan had to drop off.
Okay, all right.
Apologies. I think he had something at 11.
No, that's fine. I thought you were still with us. With this, Fatima, I hope, you know, I really enjoyed the discussion. I'm sure my colleagues did, and your answers were quite comprehensive. We should engage in such discussions, you know, because this is one way of trying to understand where, you know, each of us is coming from. So thank you so much for your time today. And once again, congratulations on a great report. We will be putting this video on our YouTube channel, and we'll also be putting up a brief report of this discussion and what broader, you know, questions and answers were given on our CSSPR's website. So once again, thank you so much for being here today, and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and absolutely enjoyed the conversation. Very robust discussion. Rabia, you're leading such an amazing group of faculty and students.
Absolutely. Thank you
Really
so
glad.
much. I really am blessed with a great bunch here. So thank you so much once again, everybody. Over and out now for now until we meet next time. Bye.
Bye.